They saw the frayed collar of his tweed jacket and judged him a relic. They heard the garbled fragments of his speech and dismissed him as a drunk. But as the titans of Wall Street's new age prepared to discard the old man like yesterday's news, they failed to recognize the architect of the very world they inhabited. In the heart of the city, everyone sneered at the broken old man, until an invisible waitress saw the one clue they all missed, a silent gesture that would unravel an empire and rewrite the future. This isn't a story about what happens when you underestimate someone. It's a story about what happens when the person you've written off holds the original manuscript to your life, and they've just decided it's time for an edit. The Gilded Quill was not merely a restaurant. It was a sanctuary of old New York, a fortress against the vulgarity of the modern world. Housed in the base of a pre-war skyscraper on Park Avenue, its walls were paneled with dark, lustrous walnut that had absorbed a century of whispered secrets and billion-dollar handshakes. The air was thick with the scent of leather-bound books, beeswax, and the ghosts of fortunes made and lost. For Clara Riley, it was a gilded cage where she served men who could buy her entire life's history as an afterthought. At 23, Clara possessed an observer's stillness. Her eyes, a soft, weary hazel, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a scholar, trained to find meaning in the faintest brush stroke, the subtlest chisel mark. She had been the most promising art history student in her year at Columbia, her graduate thesis on Renaissance patronage already earmarked for publication. Then her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, received a diagnosis that came with a string of numbers longer than a phone number. The world of academia dissolved, replaced by the clatter of plates and the sting of condescension. Now, the expert in identifying a forged Rembrandt was an expert in identifying which patron preferred still water over sparkling. Riley, Table 7 wants another bottle of the Petrus. And try not to look so morose. You're scaring the clientele, hissed Martin, the floor manager. Martin was a man perpetually squeezed by a suit 1 size too small and a mortgage 2 sizes too large. He managed the Gilded Quill with the nervous energy of a man trying to keep a priceless vase from shattering, his deference to the patrons bordering on worship. His current deity was Julian Croft, holding court at the restaurant's prime center table. At 34, Croft was the king of venture capital, a man who traded in algorithms and futures, things you couldn't see or touch. He wore a razor-sharp Italian suit of an iridescent grey that seemed to shift colours under the chandelier's light. It cost more than Clara's grandmother's first round of treatment. Croft was loud, his laughter a percussive bark that demanded attention. He was surrounded by a coterie of younger men in identical suits, all nodding with the synchronized rhythm of bobbleheads. "So I told the board," Croft boomed, his voice slicing through the hushed reverence of the dining room. "The old ways are dead. Tangible assets? That's boomer talk. The future is code. It's intellectual property. Why own the building when you can own the idea of the building?" His acolytes roared with appreciative laughter. Clara moved toward the table, her steps silent on the thick Persian rug. She reached for an empty water glass, her movements economical and discreet. Croft didn't glance at her. He was a god, and she was an incorporeal spirit of service. He gestured expansively with his hand, nearly striking her. "Watch it," he snapped without looking at her, his focus still on his audience. "This is a vintage Brioni. A drop of water on this would be a tragedy." Clara murmured an apology that was swallowed by the air, retreating back to the shadows of the service station. She felt the familiar burn of humiliation, a feeling she filed away with the dozens of others she collected each shift. It was precisely 9:17 p.m. when the delicate ecosystem of the Gilded Quill was irrevocably disturbed. The heavy oak doors, usually opened by a doorman for a reservation, made months in advance, swung inward with a slow, deliberate groan. An old man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He looked as though he had wandered in from a forgotten decade. He wore a Harris tweed jacket, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship from a bygone era, but the elbows were worn to a soft sheen, and a small, moth-eaten hole was visible on the lapel. His flannel shirt was clean, but faded, and he leaned on a simple, gnarled cane of blackthorn wood. His face was a road map of wrinkles, a testament to a long and difficult journey, but his eyes were a startling, electric blue, sharp and lucid, taking in the entire room in a single, sweeping glance. He moved with a shuffling gait, one leg dragging slightly behind the other. Martin, the manager, looked as if he'd just seen a ghost at a shareholders' meeting. He scurried across the room, his face a mask of polite panic, intercepting the man before he could take more than 3 steps onto the carpet. "Sir, my apologies," Martin whispered, his voice a strained hiss. "I believe you've made a mistake. This is a private dining establishment. Perhaps you're looking for the soup kitchen on Lexington." The old man didn't respond. He didn't even seem to register Martin's presence. His gaze was fixed on a small, unoccupied table in a quiet alcove by the window. Table 12. It was always kept empty. The staff called it the founder's table, though no one had sat there in the 2 years Clara had worked at the restaurant. It was a relic, a tradition whose origins were lost to time. The old man attempted to sidestep Martin. "Now see here," Martin said, his voice rising in pitch and volume, attracting the attention of the diners. "You can't be in here. You are disturbing our guests. I must ask you to leave." At the center table, Julian Croft swiveled in his seat, a wolfish grin spreading across his handsome face. He adored public humiliation. It was a spectator sport for the powerful. "Let him be, Martin," Croft called out, his voice dripping with amusement. "Maybe he's here to critique the decor. He certainly looks like an original fixture." The sycophants at Croft's table erupted in laughter. Martin's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. Humiliated by Croft, he redirected his fury at the easiest target. "Security," he snapped into his lapel mic. "Vagrant in the main dining room. Escort required." The old man finally stopped. He looked at Martin, then his gaze drifted to Croft. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound that emerged was a choked, guttural rasp. "Ah, no, bah." His jaw worked, his throat strained, but the words were trapped, broken fragments of thought that couldn't form a coherent whole. He tapped his temple with a frustrated finger and shook his head. "Aphasia," Croft declared loudly, as if diagnosing a specimen. The old man's had a stroke. Wonderful. A homeless man with brain damage. "Martin, get him out of here before he drools on the carpet. I'm trying to enjoy a 50-year-old scotch." 2 burly security guards in ill-fitting black suits emerged from a side hallway. They were not gentlemen. They were paid to be imposing obstacles. They moved toward the old man, their hands reaching for his arms. Clara watched from her station, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But she saw things differently. She saw the way the old man's hand gripped his blackthorn cane. Not for support, but with the familiarity of a swordsman holding a hilt. She saw the tweed of his jacket. It was worn, yes, but it was a hand-woven, bespoke piece. The stitching, though frayed, was impossibly fine. And she saw his shoes. They were scuffed and unpolished, but they were handmade English Oxfords, the leather creased with the character of decades, not the cheap decay of neglect. Most of all, she saw his signet ring, a heavy piece of gold on his pinky finger, which he kept turning inward as if to hide it. The crest was worn smooth with age, but she could just make out the shape of a quill pen crossed with a builder's compass. She didn't think. She acted. Clara placed her tray of glasses down on the service counter with a sharp clatter that cut through the tension. "Stop," she said, her voice clear and steady. Every head in the room turned toward her. Martin looked as if she had just set fire to the curtains. "Riley, get back to your station this instant." "He has a reservation," Clara announced, the lie forming on her lips with surprising ease. She walked forward, past the hulking security guards, and placed herself between them and the old man. "What are you talking about?" Martin hissed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "He's a bum." "Table 12, Clara said, her mind racing, pulling a detail from the restaurant's law. "The standing reservation for S. Thorne. I saw the confirmation in the old ledger this morning." There was no ledger, but Martin was a man who feared a procedural error more than a physical threat. His certainty wavered. I didn't see any such thing," Martin stammered, his face a mess of confusion. "It was a legacy entry," Clara pressed, summoning the authoritative tone she used when debating the provenance of a painting with a skeptical professor. "It predates the digital system." She turned to the old man, offering him a small, reassuring smile, and gestured toward table 12. "Mr. Thorne, your table is ready." The old man stared at her. For a fleeting moment, the fierce blue of his eyes softened with something that looked like astonishment. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, and, with a dignity that defied his appearance, walked past the stunned guards and seated himself at the best table in the restaurant. The room was utterly silent. Julian Croft looked apoplectic. His evening's entertainment had been commandeered by a waitress. "Are you out of your mind?" Croft spat, rising from his chair. "Martin, you're actually going to let this girl run your restaurant. The man smells of mothballs and destitution. If he stays, I'm leaving. And when I leave, my firm's corporate account, all $2 million of it a year, goes with me." The ultimatum was a nuclear bomb dropped into the hushed dining room. Clara's job, her grandmother's future, hung suspended in the air. Martin's face went pale. The simple arithmetic of survival clicked through his brain. Croft was profit, the old man was a problem, and Clara was disposable. "Riley," Martin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have 5 seconds to apologize to Mr. Croft and escort this person out of the building. Do it or you are fired." Clara looked at the old man. He had placed his hands on the table. They were gnarled with arthritis, but they were clean. He looked solitary, a man marooned on an island of silence. She thought of her grandmother, of how frustrated she became when people spoke to her as if she were a child, her mind eroded by her illness. "I can't do that, Martin," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Then you're fired," Martin shrieked. "Security, get them both out of here." "Not so fast," Julian Croft interrupted, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He sauntered over to table 12, his scotch swirling in his glass. He loomed over the seated old man. "I want to have a little fun first." He slammed his free hand down on the table. The water glass jumped. The old man didn't even flinch. "Hey, Pops," Croft sneered. "Can you understand me? Or did the stroke take your hearing too?" The old man looked up at Croft, his expression as unreadable as ancient stone. "I bet he doesn't have 2 pennies to rub together," Croft laughed, turning to play to his audience. He reached into the pocket of his $1,000 trousers and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off a single $100 bill, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it at the old man. It hit him in the chest and fell into his lap. "There you go," Croft said. "Buy yourself a hot meal. Now get the hell out of my sight." The old man slowly, painstakingly, picked up the crumpled bill. With deliberate care, he smoothed it out on the white linen tablecloth. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his worn tweed jacket. The room held its breath. Was he reaching for a weapon? He pulled out a pen. It was a beautiful old fountain pen, its silver body tarnished with age. He uncapped it, wrote something on the bill, and then pushed it back toward Croft. Croft snatched it up. "Your charity is an insult," he read aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. He threw his head back and roared with laughter. "The beggar has principles! He finds my charity insulting!" Croft turned his venomous gaze on Clara. "You want to be his champion, sweetheart? Fine. Since you're so sure he has a reservation, you will take his order. But when he can't pay the bill, and he won't be able to, I'm not just having him arrested for theft. I'm having you arrested as his accomplice. Deal?" Martin nodded eagerly, seeing a way out. "That's more than fair, Mr. Croft." Clara knew it was a cage. The cheapest appetizer on the menu was a $60 salad, but she had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She nodded, her chin held high. "Deal." She walked to the table, her composure a thin sheet of ice over a raging sea of fear. "Sir," she said softly, "what would you like to order?" The old man looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a desperate, frustrated intelligence. He tapped the menu without opening it. He then pointed to his chest and made a sweeping gesture with his hand, as if clearing a space. He was trying to say something profound, something important, but his mind and mouth were disconnected. He reached for the pen and a clean napkin. He began to draw. His hand shook, not from weakness, but from intense concentration. It wasn't writing. It was a symbol, a simple, elegant design, a quill pen crossed with a builder's compass. Clara froze. Her blood ran cold. Croft leaned over her shoulder, reeking of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction. "What's that? Is he drawing a picture of his future home in the penitentiary? He's completely lost it." But Clara wasn't listening. Her mind was racing, tumbling back through years of research, through dusty archives and high-resolution digital scans. The quill and compass, it wasn't just a random doodle. It was the guild mark of the Compagnia dei Costruttori, a secretive society of architects and patrons from the Florentine Renaissance. It was the subject of the 3rd chapter of her unfinished thesis, and the crest on the old man's ring, it was the same symbol. The old man looked at her, his eyes pleading. He tapped the drawing, then pointed to the menu, to the most expensive item listed, the Wagyu steak, a dish named the Founder's Cut. A shockwave of understanding coursed through her. S. Thorne, the Founder's Table, the Founder's Cut, the symbol of the builders. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. Why would a destitute man in New York be using the private mark of a 15th century Florentine guild, unless he wasn't just using it, unless he owned it? Clara took a deep, steadying breath. She ignored Croft, ignored Martin, ignored the entire gawking restaurant. She leaned in close to the old man. She picked up her own service pen and, on the same napkin, next to his symbol, she drew another one. A simple, unadorned stonemason's hammer. It was the traditional reply, the mark of the artisan acknowledging the patron. The reaction was immediate and seismic. The old man's stony facade shattered. His jaw fell slack, and a ragged, wheezing gasp escaped his lungs. He stared at the napkin, then at her, as if she had just performed a miracle. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly firm, his gnarled fingers pressing into her skin. Tears welled in his piercing blue eyes. "See," he rasped, the single word breaking through the fog of his aphasia, clear and sharp. "Si. Finalmente. Yes. Finally. Clara straightened up, a newfound power surging through her veins. She turned to face Martin and Croft, her expression now one of serene, unshakable confidence. The room was silent, baffled by the strange, intimate exchange. "He will have the founder's cut," Clara announced, her voice ringing with authority. "And a bottle of the 1982 Chateau Margaux." Croft's jaw tightened. What was that? What was that little drawing game you two were playing? "It's a matter of architectural history," Clara said, her tone cool and dismissive. "Something I doubt you'd find on a balance sheet, Mr. Croft. It requires a certain appreciation for things that last." Croft's face contorted with rage. "You insolent little—" "I am taking his order," Clara cut him off, her voice like steel. "As per our deal." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving a fuming Croft and a bewildered dining room in her wake. As she pushed through the swinging doors, however, her facade crumbled. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. The steak and wine she had just ordered totaled over $5,000. She checked her phone. Her bank account held a pathetic $63.14. She had understood the man's message, but in doing so, she had walked them both to the edge of a cliff. She could only pray that his story was real, because if it wasn't, they were about to take a very long fall together. Back in the dining room, Croft was not about to let it go. He pulled out his sleek black smartphone. "Get me the NYPD Midtown South Precinct," he commanded the device, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I want a patrol car at the front of the Gilded Quill in 30 minutes. We're about to witness a felony." The old man watched Croft make the call. He didn't seem afraid. He seemed weary. He took a sip of the water Clara had poured for him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was an old ornate brass key, the head shaped like a lion. He placed it quietly on the table beside his fork. He looked at Croft, then at the key, and for the first time all evening, the old man smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. The kitchen was a maelstrom of controlled chaos, but as Clara entered, the head chef, a formidable Frenchman named Antoine, looked up from his station. He saw the ticket in her hand, and his eyebrows shot up. "Table 12? Antoine grunted, his accent thick. "The founder's cut and the 82 Margaux. Is this a joke, Clara? Martin will have your head for this." "It's not a joke, chef," Clara said, her voice more stable than she felt. "Please just make it the best steak you've ever cooked." Antoine studied her face, saw the desperate resolve in her eyes, and gave a curt nod. "For a $5,000 order, I will make it sing. But this is your funeral, petite. Not mine." When Clara returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had curdled into that of a Roman Colosseum. Julian Croft had become the master of ceremonies, providing a running commentary for his table. "Look at him," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "Sitting there like a king on a throne of lies. It's the tragedy of modern society. The entitled homeless." The old man, however, seemed to have retreated into a world of his own. He stared out the large window at the glittering lights of Park Avenue, his expression distant, as if watching a memory play out on the city streets. He ignored Croft with a completeness that was more insulting than any retort. Clara approached with the bottle of wine, a dusty relic from the deepest part of the cellar. She performed the ritual, presenting the bottle, uncorking it with practiced grace. The rich, earthy aroma of aged Bordeaux filled the air. As she poured the deep ruby liquid into a crystal glass, the old man looked up at her. His lips moved, forming a silent question. Clara leaned in, shielding her face from Croft's prying eyes. "Pace," he whispered, the Italian word a struggle, but clear. "Why?" It was the question that hung over everything. Why was she risking her future for a man who was, by all appearances, a broke, brain-damaged drifter? Clara answered in the same hushed tone, the language of her art history studies feeling natural on her tongue. Mio nonno era un muratore. My grandfather was a stonemason. He built things with his hands, beautiful things. People like Mr. Croft called him a nobody. But he was a creator. You have the eyes of a creator. A flicker of profound emotion crossed the old man's face, a mixture of sorrow, gratitude, and something akin to recognition. He reached out, and his cold, dry fingers briefly brushed the back of her hand. Grazie, bambina, he breathed. Thank you, child. Enough with the secret conversation, Croft bellowed, his patience finally snapping. This is America. Speak English. What are you plotting? Trying to figure out how to pawn the silverware? Martin scurried over, his face slick with sweat. Miss Riley, that is enough. Serve the wine and step away from the table. You are not to fraternize with the guests. I was merely describing the terroir of the Bordeaux, sir, Clara lied, her voice as smooth as silk. He had a question about the soil composition of the vineyard. Soil composition? Croft spat, incredulous. He probably thinks Bordeaux is a type of car. He picked up a crusty bread roll from his table and, with a flick of his wrist, tossed it at the old man. It struck him lightly on the shoulder before falling to the floor. A collective gasp went through the room. Even Croft's cronies shifted uncomfortably. It was an act of profound disrespect, a line crossed. The old man did not react. He did not look at the roll, nor did he look at Croft. He simply raised his wine glass, inhaled its bouquet, and took a slow, deliberate sip. He closed his eyes, a look of sublime pleasure on his face, utterly denying Croft the satisfaction of a response. "You arrogant old fool!" Croft roared, his face now a blotchy red from rage and alcohol. "I am Julian Croft. My net worth is north of $3 billion. You will look at me when I throw bread at you." "Mr. Croft, please," Martin begged, wringing his hands. At that moment, the steak arrived, carried under a silver cloche by 2 junior waiters. The scent of seared prime beef and truffle butter filled the air, momentarily silencing even Croft. Clara placed the magnificent dish before the old man. "Buon appetito," she whispered. The old man picked up his knife and fork. His hands, which had trembled earlier, were now rock steady. He carved a piece of the steak with an efficiency and grace that spoke of a lifetime of fine dining. He put the piece in his mouth, chewed slowly, and then 2 large tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. He ate the entire steak in a state of silent, weeping reverence. It wasn't the sobbing of a hungry man finally fed. It was the grief of a man tasting a memory. "Oh, this is priceless," Croft crowed, pulling out his phone and starting to record. "The crying hobo. This is going viral. Smile for the camera, old-timer. We'll make you a meme." Clara felt a white-hot fury rise in her chest. She gripped a nearby water pitcher, her knuckles turning white. For a wild second, she imagined bringing it down on Croft's perfectly coiffed head. But she looked at the old man, and she knew that violence was Croft's language, not theirs. This had to be won on a different battlefield. The old man finished his meal. He delicately wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. He looked at Clara and gave a single, decisive nod. It was time. "Check, please," Croft yelled gleefully. "And have that patrol car pull right up to the front. The main event is about to begin." Martin practically ran to the point-of-sale system. He printed the bill and held it like a death warrant. He glanced at Croft, who gave him a subtle nod. "Did you include the service adjustments we talked about?" Croft asked, his voice low. Martin swallowed. Yes, Mr. Croft. A disruption fee, a security surcharge, and a private consultation fee for Miss Riley's specialized services. Excellent, Croft grinned. Let's see the deadbeat pay for that. Clara took the leather billfold from Martin. Her hands shook as she opened it. The number printed at the bottom made her stomach lurch. 28,650. This is insane, she gasped, looking at Martin. The meal was $5,000. We charged him for Mr. Croft's entire table's worth of liquor, Martin said, avoiding her eyes, as compensation for the emotional distress he caused the other patrons. It's perfectly legal. It's theft, Clara hissed. It's business, Croft said, standing over her. The strong versus the weak. Now give him the bill, waitress. Her feet felt like they were encased in cement as she walked back to table 12. She placed the billfold on the table. I am so sorry, she whispered in English. They've trapped us. The old man looked at her, his expression calm. He opened the folder. He looked at the astronomical figure. He didn't flinch. He simply reached back into his tweed jacket. Croft and his table leaned forward, their faces alight with cruel anticipation. Here we go, Croft chortled. Is he going to pull out a handful of lint? A bus pass? A half-eaten sandwich? The old man's hand emerged from his pocket. It was empty. He patted his other pockets, a look of mild confusion on his face. He looked up at Clara and gave a small, helpless shrug. He's tapped out, Croft roared, slapping the table in triumph. I knew it. Martin, call in the cops. Just as he spoke, the two uniformed NYPD officers pushed through the front doors. They were young, serious, and clearly unimpressed with the drama. We got a call about a theft, the taller officer said, his gaze sweeping the room. Right here, officer, Croft announced, pointing dramatically at the old man. This man ordered a meal worth nearly $30,000 and has no intention of paying. I want him arrested. The officer approached the table. Sir, is this true? Are you able to pay this bill? The old man remained silent. He can't speak, officer, Martin piped up. And he's a vagrant. He's been harassing everyone all night. Sir, the officer said, his voice firm as he placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. I'm going to need you to stand up. You're coming with us. Clara moved between the officer and the old man. Wait, the bill is fraudulent. They added $20,000 of their own charges to it. Step aside, miss, the officer warned, or you'll be charged with obstruction of justice. The old man slowly rose to his feet. He was surprisingly tall, and even with his stoop, he looked the officer directly in the eye. He reached into his pocket one last time. Watch it! He could have a shiv! Croft yelped, taking a step back. The old man pulled out the object he had placed on the table earlier, the ornate brass key. He held it out to the officer. The officer stared at it, bewildered. What's this? Sir, that's not currency. Croft howled with laughter. He's trying to pay with a key. A key! What does it open? His cardboard box by the river. The old man withdrew the key. He looked at the table, then picked up his fountain pen again. On the back of the fraudulent receipt, he wrote a single shaky sentence. He handed it to Clara. She read the spidery script aloud. Give the key to Alistair. Alistair, Martin scoffed. Who the hell is Alistair? The old man pointed a trembling finger toward the restaurant's main entrance. His eyes were no longer pleading, they were commanding. That's it. I'm done with this circus, the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest. No, Clara shouted. She snatched the brass key from the old man's hand. Give me 1 minute, please. Before anyone could stop her, she sprinted toward the front of the restaurant. Riley, get back here, Martin screamed after her. She burst through the heavy oak doors into the cold night air. The doorman, A stout man named Frank stared at her. "Frank, is there a man named Alistair waiting out here? An older gentleman?" Frank nodded slowly. "Yeah. There's a town car been parked across the street for an hour. Driver's name is Alistair. Said he's waiting for Mr. Thorne." Clara's heart leapt. She ran across the street, dodging a yellow cab. The gleaming black Lincoln town car was idling by the curb. The driver's window slid down. He was a man in his late 60s, with a neat grey moustache and the calm demeanour of someone who had seen everything. "Alistair," Clara panted, holding up the key. "Mr. Thorne sent me. He said to give you this." Alistair's professional calm evaporated. His eyes widened as he saw the lion-headed key. He took it from her hand, his fingers tracing its shape as if it were a holy object. "The lion key," he whispered in a clipped British accent. "Good Lord, I never thought I'd see it again. Where is he?" "Inside. The police are arresting him." "Arresting him?" Alistair's face hardened. He spoke into a small microphone on his cuff. "Execute Protocol Lion. I repeat, Protocol Lion is a go." He turned to Clara. "Get back inside, young lady. The show is about to get interesting." Back in the dining room, the officer had just snapped the first handcuff onto the old man's wrist. Croft was filming the entire thing, providing a triumphant narration for his social media followers. And here we see justice in action, folks. The Gilded Quill keeping its standards high and the streets clean. The oak doors flew open with such force that they slammed against the walls, making the chandeliers tremble. A man strode in, not with the frantic energy of Martin, but with the unstoppable momentum of a battleship. He was in his early 70s, ramrod straight in a perfectly tailored Savile Row suit, his silver hair immaculate. He was followed by two other men, both built like professional wrestlers in suits that screamed "Federal Agent." "Unhand my client," the man announced, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded absolute silence. Martin rushed forward. "Sir, this is a private matter. Police business." The man didn't even look at him. "You must be Martin, the manager. You're fired." He said it not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact, like announcing the time. He walked directly to the police officer. "Sergeant, you are currently assaulting Silas Thaddeus Thorne. I suggest you remove those handcuffs before your pension fund mysteriously evaporates." The entire room went dead quiet. Julian Croft lowered his phone. "Thorne?" Croft said, a nervous tremor in his voice. "Silas Thorne? The recluse? The man who built half of this city and then vanished 30 years ago? That's impossible, he's dead." The old man, Silas Thorne, looked at the newcomer. A flicker of relief crossed his face. The man, his lawyer, bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Thorne, it is good to see you, sir. I apologize for the delay." He held up the brass key. "The lion key. Opens the private elevator to the penthouse, the one behind the bookshelf in the library." He then turned his gaze upon Julian Croft. It was the look of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Mr. Croft, my name is Alistair Finch. I am chief counsel for the Thorne Group, and you have just made the single most catastrophic mistake of your very short career." Finch gestured to one of his men, who handed him a tablet. "Let's see. You mocked Mr. Thorne's aphasia, a result of a severe stroke. That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You assaulted him with a bread roll. That's battery. You conspired with the manager to create a fraudulent bill to have him falsely arrested. That's racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. And you did it all in a building that, as of midnight tonight, reverts from your family's 30-year lease back to its original owner, Mr. Silas Thorne." Croft's face had gone from crimson to a ghastly, waxy white. My father's lease. A lease your father begged Mr. Thorne for after he bailed out your family's failing real estate business in 1993, Finch continued, his voice relentless. A bailout funded by Mr. Thorne's personal assets. Assets which, I might add, also happen to be the primary seed capital in your venture fund, Croft Capital. Finch swiped the screen. At 9:37 p.m. tonight, when you threw that $100 bill at my client, Mr. Thorne, through his designated proxy, triggered the morality clause in your funding agreement. All Thorne Group assets are to be liquidated from your fund by market open tomorrow. I believe that leaves you with a net worth of, let me see, negative $87 million. You are not a billionaire, Mr. Croft. You are, in fact, spectacularly bankrupt. Croft stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at Silas Thorne, the man he had called a hobo, a drunk, a vagrant. He was seeing him for the first time, not as a broken old man, but as the silent, unseen God who had held the strings of his entire life. The police officer, his face pale with horror, quickly unlocked the handcuffs from Silas's wrist. Silas Thorne rubbed his wrinkled skin. He looked at Croft, then at Martin, who was trying to merge with the wallpaper. Then his gaze settled on Clara. He took his fountain pen and... The finality of Julian Croft's collapse was not a thunderclap, but the dull, soft thud of a hollow idol striking plush carpet. The sound was absorbed by the room's thick silence, a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. For a moment, no one moved. The patrons, the staff, the two suddenly very deferential police officers, all were statues in a tableau of fallen power. The air, once thick with arrogance and expensive scotch, was now thin, sharp, and crystalline with shock. Alistair Finch, a man who moved through cataclysms with the unruffled calm of a seasoned butler, was the first to break the spell. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the security team. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the stillness. "Mr. Croft appears to be unwell. Perhaps you could assist him in finding his way to a taxi. And his associates. I believe their evening here is concluded." He did not need to raise his voice. The authority in it was absolute, a fundamental law of this new universe. As the dazed sycophants were ushered out, and a blubbering, broken Croft was hauled to his feet, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief, Clara felt a strange, detached vertigo. It was as if she were watching a scene from a great historical painting, the dethroning of a minor king. Her mind, the scholar's mind, was already cataloguing the details, the pathetic slump of Croft's shoulders, the way the chandelier's light caught the tear tracks on his face, the abject terror in Martin's eyes as he tried to melt into the walnut paneling. Martin was next. Silas Thorne, who had watched Croft's removal with the weary disinterest of a man swatting a fly, slowly lifted a single, arthritic finger and pointed it at the manager. The gesture was freighted with a lifetime of judgment. Finch needed no further instruction. "Martin," he said, the name tasting like an unpleasant morsel in his mouth. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Do not concern yourself with your personal effects. They will be boxed and couriered to you. You have 60 seconds to vacate the premises before we file a formal complaint for trespassing." Martin's face crumpled. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg or protest, but no sound emerged. He simply nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion, and scurried away, a man erased from his own life's work. Then, the storm passed. The doors closed. The last echoes of the drama faded. And in the cavernous, hushed dining room, there were only 3 people left standing in the eye of the hurricane: the silent king, his loyal vizier, and the waitress who had unknowingly held the key to the kingdom. Silas Thorne let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 30 years. The rigid posture he had maintained throughout the ordeal softened, and he sagged against the table, the blackthorn cane, his only true support. The fierce electric blue of his eyes dimmed with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He looked at Clara, and for the first time she saw past the architect, past the billionaire, and saw only a tired old man who had been lost in a terrible silence for a very long time. He reached for the fountain pen, his constant companion, his only bridge to the world. His hand trembled, not with the earlier rage, but with the aftershocks of the battle. He found a clean corner on the linen tablecloth, a sacrilege in the old gilded quill, but a sacred text in the new one, and began to write. The nib scratched against the fabric, a tiny, intimate sound in the grand room. He pushed the cloth towards her. The script was spidery, elegant, but strained. They did not see a man. They saw a ledger, a profit, and a loss. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at this titan of industry, this builder of skylines, who had been reduced to a balance sheet by men who built nothing but ephemeral wealth. "I saw a creator," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "I saw the hands of a builder." His eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw a flicker of something raw and vulnerable. Gratitude. He wrote again, a single question. "Why did you risk it? For a ghost?" The question hung in the air between them, the true fulcrum of the entire evening. Why had she, with $63 to her name and a dying grandmother to support, thrown her entire life onto the fire for a stranger? She thought of her grandfather, the stonemason, his hands calloused and cracked, but capable of creating such enduring beauty. She thought of the condescending professors who dismissed his work as mere craft, not art. She thought of all the creators, the builders, the makers, who were rendered invisible by the loud, empty men who simply traded in their creations. "Because," she said, her voice finding a new, quiet strength, "my grandmother taught me that a person's worth isn't in their wallet. It's in their foundation. I looked at you, and I saw bedrock. Everyone else was just sand." A single tear escaped Silas's eye and traced a path through the roadmap of wrinkles on his cheek. He nodded slowly, a gesture of profound acceptance. He wiped his eye with the back of his hand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and then his focus shifted. The architect returned. He looked around the room, his gaze analytical, critical. He tapped the table, then the chair, then gestured to the entire restaurant. He wrote a new line on the tablecloth. "This place has a good foundation, but the decor is rotten." Alistair Finch, who had been observing the exchange with a quiet, paternal warmth, finally stepped forward. "Miss Riley," he began, his tone shifting from legal eagle to gentle emissary. "Mr. Thorne's observation is not merely aesthetic. For years, this establishment has been a monument to the very culture that just tried to devour him. A culture of exclusion, arrogance, and superficiality. He intends to change that." Silas tapped the cloth again, impatiently this time, and pointed his pen directly at Clara. Finch smiled. "And he believes the architect of that change should be you. He is formally offering you the position of general manager of the Gilded Quill, and by extension, a senior role in the oversight of the Thorne Hospitality Group." The world tilted on its axis. The floor felt both miles away and rushing up to meet her. "Manager?" The word felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she'd never spoken. "Mr. Finch, I was a waitress. I have a master's degree in Renaissance art history. I know the difference between Titian and Tintoretto, but I don't know the first thing about running a business like this." Silas began writing furiously, his pen scratching with renewed energy. He underlined the final word 3 times. Good. This is not a business. It is a sanctuary. You do not manage sanctuaries. You curate them. You understand provenance. You understand value. That is all that matters. The rest can be taught. The salary, Finch continued, as if discussing the weather, will be $300,000 per annum with a performance-based bonus structure. A corporate apartment in the Thorn Tower next door will be made available to you, and our foundation will assume full, lifetime financial responsibility for your grandmother's medical care, effective immediately. Clara sank into a nearby chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The numbers, the promises, were a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. It was too much. It was the answer to every desperate, whispered prayer she had ever uttered in the dead of night. It was freedom. It was a future. And it was terrifying. Why? She finally managed to ask, looking at Silas. Why me? He put down his pen. He reached across the table and, with surprising gentleness, took her hand. His skin was dry and cool, like old parchment. He looked at her, his blue eyes clear and piercing, and for the first time he tried to speak. His mouth worked, his jaw tight with effort. A low, guttural sound emerged, the sound of a rusted engine trying to turn over. Cause, he rasped, the 2 words a monumental struggle. He squeezed his eyes shut in concentration. You saw. You saw. It was the simplest, most profound explanation of all. In a world that had rendered him invisible, she had seen him. In the gilded cage where she herself was invisible, he had seen her. It wasn't a transaction. It was an act of mutual recognition, a bond forged in the crucible of public humiliation. Tears, hot and overwhelming, streamed down her face. They were not the familiar tears of shame or fear, but tears of a staggering, terrifying, beautiful release. She nodded, unable to speak. She squeezed his hand. Yes, she finally choked out, the word a promise. Yes, partner. The first day was the hardest. She arrived not through the staff entrance in the alley, but through the grand oak doors at the front. She wore the most professional dress she owned, a simple black sheath that still felt like a costume. The entire staff was assembled in the main dining room. Chef Antoine, the 2 sommeliers, the line cooks, the bussers, the dishwashers, the very people who had been her colleagues, her friends, and in some cases, her tormentors, hours before. They stared at her with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and fear. She stood before them, her prepared speech turning to ash in her mouth. The imposter syndrome was a physical weight, pressing down on her, whispering that she was a fraud, a fluke. She looked at their faces, saw her own exhaustion and anxiety mirrored back at her, and she abandoned the script. My name is Clara Riley, she began, her voice shaking slightly. Yesterday I was one of you. Today, my title has changed, but my purpose has not. I know what it's like to be invisible, to be talked down to have your feet ache so badly you want to cry, but you have to keep smiling. That ends. Now. She took a breath. Mr. Thorne and I believe that the foundation of this restaurant isn't the building or the name. It's the people who work here. So my first act as manager is this. Effective immediately, every employee's hourly wage is being raised to $35 an hour. Every full-time employee will be enrolled in the Thorne Group's Platinum Health Insurance Plan, with all premiums paid. And we are establishing a scholarship fund for employees and their children. A stunned silence fell over the room, broken by a few disbelieving murmurs. A young dishwasher from Ecuador, a man named Marco, whom Martin had constantly berated for his English, raised his hand tentatively. Is this real, Miss Clara?" "It's real, Marco," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We are going to make this the best restaurant in New York. Not because of our wealthy clientele, but because we are the best treated, most respected staff in the city. We will lead with dignity. That is the new house rule." A single person began to clap. It was Chef Antoine. He clapped slowly, deliberately, a look of grudging, profound respect on his face. Then another joined, and another, until the entire room erupted in an ovation that was less about her and more about the dawn of a new, unexpected hope. In that moment, Clara felt the costume shed away. She was no longer a waitress playing a manager. She was the curator. Her partnership with Silas evolved into a quiet, daily ritual. He would arrive at the restaurant every afternoon, his presence a silent, grounding force. He was undergoing intensive therapy, and the struggle was immense. Their conversations were a strange and beautiful hybrid. He would start a sentence with his slow, gravelly voice, fighting for every word. When the blockage became too great, his frustration mounting, Clara would slide a napkin and his pen across the table without a word. He would finish the thought in his elegant script, and she would respond aloud, creating a seamless dialogue between the spoken and the written word. He taught her his philosophy not through lectures, but through parables written on cocktail napkins. A skyscraper is a signature, but a foundation is a promise. Never trust a man who doesn't know the name of the person who cleans his office. Beauty without utility is a corpse in a fine suit. She, in turn, brought him back into the world of art and history he had long since abandoned. She took him on private tours of the Frick and the Met, speaking softly to him about the brushstrokes of a Rembrandt or the lines of a Donatello sculpture. She saw the way his eyes lit up, the way his architect's mind connected the flow of a painted drapery to the load-bearing curve of an archway. She was giving him back a part of his language that had nothing to do with his vocal cords. She was helping him rebuild the connections not just in his brain, but between his soul and the world. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after that night, Silas walked into the restaurant without his cane. He moved slowly, deliberately, but with a new stability. He found Clara in the main dining room, where she was overseeing the installation of a new centerpiece. The old, ostentatious floral arrangement was gone. In its place, on a simple pedestal of reclaimed oak, was a beautiful, hand-carved block of marble, a gift from a young sculptor whose career the New Thorn Foundation was sponsoring. "It's beautiful," Clara said, turning to him with a smile. "The stone has a good heart," Silas said. The sentence was slow, each word carefully chosen and placed, like a master mason setting a cornerstone. It was the longest sentence he had ever spoken to her. "Silas," she said, her own heart swelling. "That was perfect." He smiled, a rare, warm expression that reached his eyes. "Practice," he said simply. He looked around the transformed room. The gilded quill was still elegant, but its character had changed. The oppressive reverence was gone, replaced by a warm, creative energy. The tables were filled not just with financiers, but with artists, writers, architects, and academics. Table 12, the founder's table, was no longer kept empty. It was now permanently reserved for a rotating guest of honor, a teacher, a nurse, a community organizer, whose meal was always on the house. Silas handed her a thick, leather-bound book. It was a new ledger. She opened it. The first page contained a single, elegant drawing, a quill pen crossed with a builder's compass. Beneath it, written in Silas's now steady hand, was a dedication. for Clara, who taught me that the most important structures are not built of steel and stone, but of kindness and courage. You are the master builder now." She looked up at him, her vision blurring. He simply nodded, then walked to the large window overlooking Park Avenue. She joined him, standing beside him as they watched the city lights begin to glitter in the twilight. The city he had built, the sanctuary she now curated. "Julian Croft," she said quietly, the name a ghost from another lifetime. "I heard he's working as a junior analyst at a small firm in Delaware. They say he's quiet, polite." Silas watched the river of headlights flowing down the avenue. He was silent for a long time, and Clara thought he was lost in the memory of his humiliation. But when he finally spoke, his voice was not bitter. It was the calm, measured voice of a man who had seen empires rise and fall, and had learned the difference between what shines and what endures. "Some buildings are meant to fall," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "so that the sun can finally reach the things that grow